If you ever hear a master key turning at 4 a.m., you learn what silence really sounds like. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I own a home in Willow Creek Estates where every rule is written like a warning. The neighborhood looks perfect from the outside with its neatly trimmed lawns, clean streets, and ambient lights that shut off exactly on schedule. But perfection always has a price, and in Willow Creek, that price is absolute control. I remember waking up that night before the sound even finished forming in my mind. A sharp metallic impact hit the front door, followed by another demand disguised as authority. The voice outside belonged to Deborah Whitmore, the HOA president, who believed compliance was optional only for herself. She was shouting about a master key she claimed gave her legal access to any home in the community. I did not move at first because movement is what panic wants from you. Instead, I listened to the house. My security system had already shifted into alert mode without a single sound. Lights stayed low, sensors remained active, and the entire perimeter locked instantly. The only thing louder than her voice was the quiet confirmation that my home was awake before I was. Willow Creek had rules for lawns, fences, and mailboxes, but none for what happens when someone tests the limits of authority itself. Deborah believed she was enforcing safety, but she had never read the automated systems she tried to override. I got out of bed slowly, not because I was afraid, but because speed was unnecessary. The cameras showed everything in clean frames, time-stamped and precise. She stood outside on the porch like she owned the air around the property. The master key in her hand caught the glow of the porch light each time she moved it. Behind me, my K9 security units were already in position, calm, trained, and perfectly silent. Rex and Titan were not reacting to her presence with aggression, only to established protocol. They had been part of my home's security system since the day I moved in. They were not kept for mindless violence, but for detection, deterrence, and absolute tactical presence. They did not bark or whine like ordinary pets. The two massive German shepherds sat perfectly erect in the dark hallway, their ears pinned forward toward the heavy wood of the front door. Their eyes remained fixed on the entryway, reflecting the dim glow of the security panel. I stepped into the hallway and watched the control panel confirm what I already knew. Unauthorized access attempt detected. The system logged every detail as she tried again to force entry with confidence that was not hers to carry. I did not open the door. I did not raise my voice. I simply watched a situation unfold that she no longer controlled. In Willow Creek Estates, people like Deborah Whitmore were used to doors opening when they demanded it. That night, mine stayed closed. And for the first time, the neighborhood was about to learn what it means when authority meets an autonomous system it cannot override. The heavy oak door remained unyielding as Deborah Whitmore raised her voice again. Her words cut through the early morning air with a practiced sharpness. She announced that she was conducting an emergency safety inspection authorized by the Homeowners Association Board. She asserted that the community bylaws granted her immediate access to any property under exigent circumstances. She stood less than 2 feet from the threshold, her shadow stretching long across the concrete porch under the uniform streetlights. Inside the house, the atmosphere was dense with absolute focus. The digital interface on my hallway wall hummed softly as it processed her vocal signatures and physical movements. It officially categorized her presence as an unverified breach attempt. Rex and Titan moved into their designated tactical positions with a fluid, silent precision that only years of rigorous training could produce. The two large German shepherds did not emit a single growl or whine. Their massive paws made absolutely no sound as they advanced across the hardwood floor. They took up positions exactly 3 feet back from the entryway, flanking the wide hallway in a disciplined defensive formation. Their dark coats blended perfectly into the shadows of the unlit corridor. Only the faint amber reflection of the security panel illuminated their intense, unblinking eyes. They stood perfectly erect, their heavy chests rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. Every muscle in their frames was coiled with potential energy, yet their discipline held them completely stationary. They were not acting out of canine aggression, but in total synchronization with the residential perimeter protocol. Deborah hammered on the wood with the heavy brass ring of her keychain. The sharp vibrations traveled through the reinforced core of the door, but the structure did not budge. She shouted that ignoring a formal board directive would result in immediate fines and legal escalation. She claimed that she knew I was inside and that non-compliance was a direct violation of community standards. Through the high-definition exterior camera feed, I watched her fingers sort through a large metal ring until she selected a heavy brass key. She held it up to the light as if the physical object itself carried the weight of law. She believed that the neighborhood rules superseded private property rights, and she expected the physical world to bow to her administrative title. I stood completely still just 5 feet away from the dogs, observing the live telemetry on my tablet. The system logged her second official verbal threat and timestamped the physical contact with the door frame. The security network had already isolated the front entryway lock, converting the mechanical cylinder into a free-spinning mechanism that would accept no physical input without digital validation. Rex and Titan shifted their weights simultaneously, a subtle adjustment that aligned their bodies with the center of the door. Their ears remained pinned forward, capturing the exact location of her movements outside. They were waiting for a specific system command, completely indifferent to her anger. The house felt entirely alive around us, working as a silent extension of my own intent. Deborah stepped closer, her face filling the lens of the primary optical sensor. She pressed her ear against the wood, listening for any sign of movement or panic from within. She did not realize that her every breath was being analyzed by the environmental sensors. She did not know that her authority had already been stripped away by a system that only recognized cryptographic credentials. The silence from the interior seemed to agitate her further, fracturing her composed exterior. She raised the master key toward the keyway, ready to force her way into my home. The brass master key slid into the keyway with a dry metallic scrape that resonated through the quiet hallway. Deborah Whitmore leaned her weight into the door, her hand twisting the heavy ring with absolute certainty. But the mechanical cylinder merely spun freely in its housing, offering zero resistance and engaging no internal deadbolts. The system had completely decoupled the physical lock from the actual latch mechanism the moment her credentials failed validation. She grunted in frustration, backing up a half-step to stare at the unyielding handle. On my monitor, the threat assessment status instantly flashed to escalation level 2. I entered a short command into the touch interface to initiate the acoustic deterrence protocol. The system immediately rerouted the live audio feed from the hallway sensors directly into the external directional speakers hidden beneath the porch eaves. Rex and Titan responded to the flashing amber indicator on their collar modules without a single command from me. The massive German shepherds dropped their heads low, their broad chests expanding as they drew in a deep breath. They emitted a simultaneous, low-frequency growl that vibrated at a deep acoustic level through the floorboards. The directional speakers amplified this visceral sound, projecting it directly toward the porch with crushing clarity. It was not a frantic bark of a panicked animal, but the steady, rumbling warning of alpha predators marking their territory. The heavy, resonant vibration literally shook the air around the entryway, mimicking the presence of much larger beasts waiting in the dark. Deborah froze instantly, her hand hovering inches from the brass door handle as the sound washed over her. The deep rumble seemed to penetrate the concrete porch beneath her designer shoes. The supreme confidence on her face fractured, replaced by a sudden pale hesitation. She looked around nervously, trying to pinpoint the exact source of the terrifying sound in the dim morning light. Her breathing became shallow as she took a full step away from the center of the door. She wrapped her sweater tightly around her arms, her eyes darting toward the dark bushes lining the walkway. Inside, Rex and Titan maintained the exact same depth of growl, their muscular frames vibrating with disciplined restraint. They did not scratch at the door, nor did they lung forward. They simply held the pitch perfectly, creating an inescapable wall of sound that dominated the exterior environment. The system automatically began mirroring these telemetry logs to the secure county compliance server. Every second of her hesitation was now being encoded into an unalterable digital ledger far beyond the jurisdiction of the Homeowners Association. Deborah spoke again, but the sharpness in her voice had completely dissolved into an unstable tremor. She stammered that she was a community official and demanded that I control my animals immediately. She claimed that having unrecorded dangerous dogs was a direct violation of neighborhood safety codes. She was trying to use administrative language as a shield against a primitive fear, but the house did not process excuses. The directional speakers cut her off with another wave of amplified, rhythmic growling that felt closer than before. She dropped her heavy key ring onto the concrete porch, the metallic clatter sounding sharp in the heavy silence. She bent down quickly to retrieve it, her movements losing all of their previous administrative posture. She was no longer an enforcer executing a board directive. She was an intruder realizing she was completely exposed in a controlled perimeter. Deborah Whitmore scrambled to pick up her heavy key ring from the cold concrete. Her fingers brushed against the metal twice before she managed to secure it in her grip. The arrogant posture that had defined her arrival was completely gone now. She straightened up slowly, her eyes wide as she stared at the blank surface of the front door. The low-frequency growling from the speakers suddenly cut off, plunging the porch back into an oppressive, heavy silence. This abrupt lack of sound seemed to terrify her even more than the amplification itself. She stood completely frozen, her heart visibly hammering against her thin sweater. I looked down at the primary control interface and selected the active containment subroutines. With a single precise swipe, I deactivated the main porch illumination. The warm white light vanished instantly, leaving only the dim, amber glow of the neighborhood street lamps 40 feet away. Before her eyes could fully adjust to the darkness, the hidden infrared floodlights clicked on. They bathed the exterior yard in an invisible beam that optimized my camera feeds to crystal clarity. I then entered the secondary command to release the electronic privacy shades on the main door window. The thick glass panel was made of smart glass that could transition from opaque to transparent in milliseconds. The electrical current dropped to zero, and the milky white surface dissolved into absolute transparency. Deborah gasped aloud and staggered back a full foot as the interior of the hallway was revealed to her. She found herself staring directly through the glass into the dark corridor. Rex and Titan were standing exactly where they had been, completely motionless like twin statues carved from granite. The dim backlighting from the security panel caught the sharp contours of their muscular shoulders. Their massive jaws were slightly parted, revealing the clean white flash of their teeth against their dark gums. Most terrifyingly, their eyes were reflecting the infrared light from the porch sensors. To Deborah, it looked as though two demonic creatures with glowing, iridescent eyes were staring directly through her soul from less than 2 inches away. They did not scratch at the glass or throw their weight against the door frame. They simply held her gaze with a cold, computational intensity that mirrored the house itself. The sheer discipline of the animals made them look more like precision machinery than living creatures. Deborah clutched her keys to her chest, her breath fogging up the exterior surface of the window. She tried to maintain her footing, but her knees were visibly shaking under the intense pressure of their stare. She looked down at the master key in her hand, realizing it was completely useless against a Feo die of this scale. The system interface displayed a steady stream of data as it encrypted the video feed for the permanent cloud archive. The status line confirmed that the regional oversight network had acknowledged the emergency transmission. Every twitch of her face and every frantic movement was being recorded as evidence of unauthorized escalation. She whispered something that the microphone picked up as a desperate plea for compliance review. She was realizing that this environment was not negotiating with her title or her clipboard. The house had shifted from a passive structure into an active, observing trap that held her completely exposed under the morning sky. The crushing weight of those two glowing infrared stares became too much for Deborah Whitmore to bear. She took a frantic step backward, her high heels catching the edge of the welcome mat before she stumbled toward the steps. She completely abandoned all thoughts of her master key, her board authority, and her scheduled safety inspection. She turned her entire body away from the transparent glass door, determined to flee the property line as fast as possible. She hurried down the concrete walkway, her breaths coming in short, ragged gasps that cut through the 4 o'clock morning chill. She reached the perimeter boundary of the front yard, ready to push through the heavy iron gate and disappear onto the empty asphalt street. But as she grabbed the wrought iron handle and yanked it toward herself, the mechanism gave a sharp electronic click and refused to move. The automation system had already anticipated her path of egress, activating the heavy electromagnetic locks across the entire outer perimeter fence. She rattled the metal bars desperately, the clanging sound echoing down the silent neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates. She was completely trapped inside the property line, enclosed by a 6-foot iron barrier that she could not climb. Inside the dark hallway, the security interface displayed a flashing green icon as the internal courtyard doors slid open. Rex and Titan did not rush out with uncontrolled barking or frantic speed. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized grace, slipping through the side access panel like two liquid shadows pouring into the night. They split up instantly upon entering the open air, executing a textbook perimeter pinch maneuver that they had practiced 1,000 times. Titan looped around the eastern edge of the formal garden, his dark coat rendering him completely invisible against the thick boxwood hedges. Rex advanced directly down the center line of the main concrete walkway, cutting off any chance of her returning to the relative safety of the covered porch. Deborah turned around in absolute panic when she heard the faint, rhythmic click of heavy paws on the concrete behind her. She pressed her spine flat against the locked iron gate, her eyes widening as she scanned the pitch-black yard. Rex stepped out of the shadow of the large oak tree, stopping exactly 10 feet in front of her. At the exact same microsecond, Titan materialized from the bushes on her left flank, sealing her against the iron bars. The two giant German shepherds did not lunge at her, nor did they make any attempt to bite or strike. They dropped into a rigid, low crouch, their front paws planted firmly on the ground and their ears pinned flat against their skulls. They were executing the ultimate hold and bark protocol, a specialized restraint technique designed to completely paralyze an intruder using pure psychological dominance. They did not emit a loud, chaotic noise that would wake the neighborhood. Instead, they unleashed a perfectly synchronized, deep bass rumbling from the very depths of their massive chests. The sound was so intense that Deborah could feel the heavy vibrations traveling upward through her shoes and into her spine. She stood frozen to the spot, completely immobilized by the terrifying realization that any sudden movement would trigger an immediate physical response from the two apex predators guarding the perimeter. The absolute silence of the 4 o'clock morning was now completely dominated by the deep vibration radiating from Rex and Titan. Deborah Whitmore pressed her back so hard against the iron gate that the cold metal bars bit directly into her shoulder blades. Her fancy leather clipboard slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the concrete with a dull thud next to her discarded key ring. The master key that had once symbolized her ultimate authority over the neighborhood lay glinting uselessly in the grass just 2 feet away from Titan's massive left paw. She did not dare to bend down and retrieve it. She did not even dare to wipe away the cold sweat that was pouring down her pale face and stinging her eyes. Every single ounce of her administrative confidence had shattered into microscopic pieces. She was realizing that the rules she had written on paper meant absolutely nothing to the two highly trained apex predators holding her at bay. She tried to take a shallow breath, but even that microscopic movement caused Rex to let out a short, sharp huff of air that instantly froze her in place. The two German shepherds remained in their flawless low crouches, their muscular bodies perfectly coiled and ready to react to any sudden burst of panic. They did not show any signs of wild canine anger or uncontrolled aggression. Their behavior was terrifyingly methodical, reflecting a deep level of professional security discipline that she could not comprehend. They were treating her exactly like an inanimate target that required absolute containment until the system provided further instructions. Tears of pure frustration and terror began to roll down Deborah's cheeks, leaving dark tracks in her heavy makeup. She began to sob silently, her chin trembling as she stared at the iridescent eyes of the dogs reflecting the invisible infrared light. She whispered a quiet plea for help, her voice completely lacking the sharp, demanding tone she had used just 10 minutes earlier. She began to stammer an apology to the empty yard, addressing the hidden cameras that she knew were tracking her every move. She begged me to call off the animals, promising that she would forget all about the safety inspection and the homeowners association violations. She was completely broken, reduced to a trembling figure trapped on a dark porch by a system she had foolishly tried to override. From my position inside the hallway, I watched the entire breakdown on the crystal-clear telemetry screen. The security system logged her complete lack of forward momentum and classified the threat level as entirely suppressed. The autonomous ledger continued to compile the data packages, transmitting the encrypted file containing her identity, her unauthorized entry attempts, and her current containment status to the county archives server. The digital framework of my home had successfully flipped the power dynamic without requiring a single physical confrontation. The neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates remained completely dark and unaware of the drama unfolding at my perimeter fence. The uniformed street lamps cast a peaceful glow over the empty pavement outside the gate, creating a bizarre contrast with the intense psychological warfare happening just inches away. Deborah closed her eyes tightly, unable to look at the massive jaws of the dogs any longer. She stood completely paralyzed, waiting for the long morning hours to pass, entirely at the mercy of an unyielding security infrastructure. The heavy silence of Willow Creek Estates was suddenly broken by the rhythmic, distant wail of a secondary siren approaching from the main boulevard. Intense red and blue emergency strobe lights began to flash against the uniform white garage doors across the street, cutting through the dense morning mist with frantic speed. The automated security system had dispatched a silent alert to the county sheriff department back during the second failed entry attempt, bypassing the local neighborhood watch entirely. A marked patrol vehicle rolled to a stop right at the edge of my property line, its powerful spotlights sweeping across the manicured front lawn and illuminating the entire perimeter. 2 deputies stepped out of the vehicle, their heavy-duty flashlights cutting bright white beams through the darkness as they approached the closed iron gate. They immediately stopped when their lights caught the surreal scene unfolding on the concrete walkway. Deborah Whitmore was still pressed flat against the iron bars, her face completely pale and her hands trembling as she stood paralyzed between the 2 dogs. Rex and Titan did not lose their operational focus for a single microsecond when the officers arrived. The giant German shepherds maintained their rigid low crouches, their ears pinned back and their eyes locked on the target without showing any distraction from the flashing police lights. They were completely dialed into the perimeter protocol, waiting for an authorized system termination command before breaking their defensive hold. One of the deputies called out, ordering the homeowner to step outside and secure the animals immediately. I stepped out of the dark hallway and opened the heavy front door, the smart glass window instantly shifting back to an opaque state behind me. I did not yell or rush down the steps. I merely raised my right hand and gave a sharp, single snap of my fingers. Rex and Titan instantly broke their crouches, their deep rumbling growls cutting off in perfect unison as they stood up smoothly. They turned away from Deborah without a single bark, trotting back to my side with absolute military discipline and sitting down perfectly straight on my left and right flanks. The deputies looked visibly impressed by the sheer level of control, their hands relaxing away from their utility belts as they unlatched the heavy perimeter gate using the temporary digital bypass code my system had transmitted to their cruiser. Deborah collapsed forward onto her knees the moment the gate swung open, her leather clipboard and master key ring kicking away across the concrete. She began to weep loudly, pointing a shaking finger at me and screaming to the deputies that I had set a trap to have her mauled by dangerous beasts. She demanded that the officers arrest me immediately for aggravated assault and for violating the community residential safety ordinances. The primary deputy looked down at her, then looked at the heavy brass master key lying in the grass next to the walkway. He picked up the key ring with a gloved hand, his expression turning cold as he noted the official Homeowners Association seal stamped on the metal ring. He turned back to Deborah and told her to stand up, stating that the sheriff department had already reviewed the automated live data package my home had uploaded to the county network. He informed her that a homeowners association title did not grant a citizen the legal right to attempt forced entry into a private residence at 4 o'clock in the morning. The secondary deputy escorted Deborah Whitmore toward the back of the marked patrol vehicle as the flashing red and blue strobe lights continued to illuminate the damp morning air. Her heavy footsteps dragged along the concrete walkway, completely stripped of the administrative authority she had carried into the yard. She attempted to turn her head back toward the house one last time, her voice cracking as she threatened to bring a formal lawsuit against me and the entire sheriff department. She screamed that the Homeowners Association board would strip me of my property rights and that the community would never tolerate a homeowner who weaponized autonomous technology against its leadership. But the deputy merely opened the rear door of the cruiser and firmly instructed her to watch her head as she slid into the hard plastic seat. The heavy door clicked shut with a dull, final thud, instantly muffling her desperate complaints. A few porch lights began to flicker on across the street of Willow Creek Estates, their pale yellow beams casting long shadows onto the empty pavement. Several neighbors peeked through their window blinds, their faces silhouetted against the glass as they watched the unbelievable downfall of the neighborhood dictator. The primary officer walked back toward the gate where I stood flanked by my security units. Rex and Titan remained perfectly stationary on my left and right sides, their dark coats blending into the shadow of the covered entrance. Their breathing was slow and entirely controlled, their ears remaining erect as they monitored the environment with disciplined precision. The deputy looked at the digital display on his department-issued tablet, confirming that the encrypted data package containing her exact entry timestamps and verbal threats had been successfully processed into the regional law enforcement node. He noted that the county prosecutor would be handling the case as a felony trespass and attempted unlawful entry under the updated state residential protection statutes. He handed me a standard case receipt number and told me that the automated logging system had done all the heavy lifting for the investigation. He advised me that no further action was required from my side since the digital evidence chain was already completely locked and immutable. I thanked the officer calmly as he walked back to his vehicle, his boots crunching softly on the asphalt. The patrol cruiser shifted into drive, its tires rolling smoothly down the clean streets of the community before turning onto the main boulevard. The flashing emergency lights vanished from the neighborhood walls, allowing the deep darkness of the early morning to settle back over the property line. Rex and Titan shifted their weight simultaneously, looking up at me as if waiting for the final operational command to close out the scenario. The house felt entirely silent again, its layered systems quietly transitioning away from the active containment protocol. The brass master key that Deborah had dropped remained inside the evidence locker of the cruiser, leaving her with absolutely nothing to show for her early morning campaign of control. The taillights of the patrol cruiser completely disappeared beyond the entrance of Willow Creek Estates, leaving the street in total darkness once again. The few porch lights that had flickered on across the pavement began to shut off one by one as the neighbors retreated back into their identical homes. The entire neighborhood returned to its manufactured state of perfection, looking as though absolutely nothing had disrupted the morning schedule. But inside my property line, the reality of what had occurred was permanently carved into the digital network. The heavy wrought iron gate at the edge of the lawn gave a soft mechanical click as the electromagnetic locks re-engaged, sealing the perimeter boundary against the outside world. I turned away from the walkway and stepped back inside the house, my hand resting briefly on the smooth frame of the front entryway. Rex and Titan followed me into the corridor without needing a single word, their heavy paws sliding over the hardwood floor with fluid precision. The transparent smart glass panel on the main door instantly shifted back to its dark, opaque state, blocking out the faint ambient glow of the morning street lamps. The central security dashboard on the wall hummed quietly, its interface displaying a final green confirmation message indicating the full closure of the active event chain. The system had successfully completed its primary decision cycle, converting the entire night of data into an uneditable, encrypted archive format. Every single timestamp, camera frame, and audio recording of Deborah Whitmore had been mirrored across multiple redundant storage nodes outside of local homeowners association jurisdiction. The structure of my home had officially transitioned away from its active defense posture and settled into long-term preservation mode. There were no flashing amber alerts remaining on the screen, and no pending validation requests waiting for manual input. The house was no longer evaluating potential outcomes because the situation had already been concluded by the framework designed to protect it. I reached out and tapped the primary control panel, shutting down the secondary monitoring feeds and allowing the display to drop to its lowest power configuration. Rex and Titan walked toward their designated resting mats at the end of the unlit hallway, their muscular bodies finally relaxing as they lay down in unison. They did not whine or monitor the windows any longer, their role concluding the exact moment the system confirmed total perimeter stabilization. They rested their heavy heads on their paws and closed their eyes, fully returning to their passive observation status within the architectural layout. I took a slow breath and stood in the quiet darkness of the hallway, listening to the deep, absolute silence that now filled the entire residence. The master key that Deborah had relied on so heavily was gone, completely stripped of its functional meaning and locked away as physical evidence of a felony trespass. The neighborhood rules still existed on paper, but they would never again cross the threshold of my private property without proper cryptographic validation. The environment outside my front door was exactly as still as it had been at 4 o'clock in the morning, but the entire balance of power within Willow Creek Estates had been altered permanently. I turned toward the back bedroom, leaving the automated system to maintain its silent, unyielding vigil over the sealed archive of the night.